WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. When you talk to people about what they care about, you often hear common threads. Many of us care about children and the future children will live in. Right now, Michigan kids are struggling with something fundamental to their future: reading. Over the last 20 years, the state dropped from 30th to 44th in fourth grade reading scores. Last year, only a quarter of fourth graders were considered proficient in reading. So what is Michigan to do about this? Some suggest we should be looking to Mississippi. That's because that state has dramatically improved its math and reading scores for fourth graders, now ranking in the top 20 after it was at the bottom a decade ago. Advocates often remind us of the importance of well-funded education. But Mississippi isn't flush with cash. U.S. Census data tells us it's America's poorest state. So how did they do it? And what does Michigan need to do to change its rankings? To discuss all that, we have Adrea Truckenmiller with us. She's an associate professor of special education at Michigan State University. Before coming to MSU, she educated professionals on the best techniques to teach others to read. Professor Truckenmiller, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me, Robin. I'm delighted to be here.
So first things first, Professor, what is the science of reading? And how do you best teach people to read and write?
Yeah, that's been a really hot topic recently, and it's hard to define the science of reading in a really quick, simple way. So I like to use one word for describing the science of reading, and that's evidence. And it's using evidence from scientific studies like randomized control trials and quasi-experimental designs, and actually testing what instructional practices work and measuring it on students' reading outcomes and comparing it to a control group. So making sure that the thing that we say we're looking for is actually the thing that had an impact on students' reading.
And how widespread has the science of reading been implemented, like let's say across the country?
Yeah, it's been kind of hit and miss. It's not been that long that we've actually applied the scientific approach to studying what happens in schools and what works best for kids in educating. It was started with just a few researchers, and mostly in the medical fields like the psychology field or the speech language pathology world, and it was funded by NIH back in the 90s. So it started very, very, very small, and then in 2002 the U.S. Department of Education created the Institute for Education Sciences, which was devoted to looking at what works in schools. And so there was just a small amount of money there for funding research and trying to get that out there. And so our challenge has been, we have a few things, we know quite a few things that work really well, especially for teaching reading, and we're trying to continue that research and also spread that research. And the spread has been the difficult part, because there's this interesting statistic that only it takes 17 years for only 14% of the research to get from we've studied it, we see that it works, and now we need all of these other levers in place to pull to get it widespread.
So if science-based reading is relatively new, how is reading typically taught in the U.S.?
The most common way that reading is taught is through building an enjoyment of reading, reading to kids, using some things called leveled readers, where they just expose kids to a lot of reading, and there's an implicit idea that if we get kids to love reading, that we build the motivation piece, that they'll figure out how to break the code themselves. And this works for 30% to maybe 40% of kids sometimes. But the written language is pretty new in the history of evolution. So printed words have only been around for about 6,000 years. And so our brains have not yet evolved to naturally pick up the printed text on page. So we actually have to explicitly teach it for most kids. And that's the piece that some teachers have brilliantly intuitively done on their own. And there's been some curricula out there that some people use that have been used, forever, that have done that. But getting that piece of it widespread has been the most recent challenge.
That's so interesting. So reading and picking up the written language, you're saying this is not an intuitive thing. In fact, when we are learning to read and write, we're really wrestling with our brains and wrestling against some of our baser instincts.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good way to put it.
So what works really well then? I mean, I'm wondering then, is it phonics? Is it decoding?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a lot of phonics and decoding going on in many classrooms, and in some classrooms it's going really, really, really well. And then in others, so we've done some observations where the amount of time spent on decoding is happening. And so we have a lot of people around the state who are like, well, we are doing decoding. We have 30 minutes devoted to that. We don't need to add more time. And they're right. We don't need to add more time if there's decoding instruction happening. What we've been seeing in some of our observations is the quality of that instruction or the exact pieces that need to be put in place. Louisa Moats in 1999 called teaching reading is actually rocket science. And so it's really difficult. We have to really break down words into their smallest pieces. And because you and I and other teachers are all fluent readers, we see words as whole words as opposed to the smaller parts, and don't actually intuitively know the rules of reading words. And there's actually some pretty specific syllable pronunciation rules that will give us clues to teach reading in better ways that breaks it down for where kids are in their developmental trajectory of learning to read. And so that's what's been very exciting about the phonics instruction that we've looked at in studies. How can we improve the way phonics instruction occurs in the classroom so that all kids can get it? And we especially have to intensively do that for students with dyslexia. They're a particular population that we can now be a lot more effective in teaching kids. They specifically really need this more intensive, more rule-based, how do we teach the breaking of the code? And so I also want to add up to that, if I can, a lot of times the science of reading has been pushed as this is a phonics-only approach. And I can see why that happens because we have so much good research on how phonics develops, and we've needed to work on that. But an equally important thing that science has shown us when we study kids and study how reading develops is the language comprehension piece of things. It's equally as important, and we have some studies on language comprehension, not as many as we do on phonics, but that's an area where we need to continue to research and then continue to get the research that is out there into the schools and into the hands of the teachers and the parents who really, really, really want it.
So this is about making the world of literacy an equitable one. I know that a lot of your research has focused on that, on how to level that playing field. This is the Metro on WDET. We're talking about teaching reading, the science of reading, and the Mississippi Miracle, which refers to dramatic improvements in reading and math scores over the last 15 years for students in that state. Our guest is Adrea Truckenmiller. She's an associate professor of special education at Michigan State. So, Professor Truckenmiller, we've set the scene a little bit. Now I do want to get into the Mississippi Miracle, as it's called. Mississippi has done a few things to create this sort of miracle situation. So it grades schools depending on how students test at those schools. It holds third graders back who can't read, and it's invested a lot in teacher training and literacy coaches. I know where you stand on investing in teacher training, but you're not a fan of holding kids back if they can't read. Why?
Yeah, that's a great question. The research on the retention piece, holding kids back in third grade, has been really interesting over the past couple of decades. There's many studies that show that holding kids back and retention has really harmful effects on long-term outcomes. Those students who are held back are less likely to graduate from high school. They're more likely to have difficulties in their social and academic lives. And so for that reason, I don't think we should put this on the backs of kids. Sure. And then there's also the research that shows that social promotion, which is the opposite of retention, when a student fails, that you promote them anyway to keep them with their social group, and those studies have shown detrimental impacts of social promotion. So people, it's a really difficult place to be to say, okay, let's look at the research and weigh those two things. My issue is there's so many other things that we can do instead of relying on retention. And when we have retention so early in third grade, it's putting all of the responsibility on the children, when we should be, and we can be, putting our resources in better places by putting more emphasis and focus on really high quality instructional practices happening in kindergarten, first and second grade, so that we can prevent the number of students who end up performing below expectations at the end of third grade. And we've shown through many, many, many studies that we can do that. And so we've previously kind of treated kindergarten, first and second grade as a place for play, which is great. We should be having lots of play occurring there, but we also need to have a more focused approach on, we really do need to put lots of resources in kindergarten and first and second grade to make sure that our best teachers are there, our best curricula, we're investing in good curricular materials there, we're investing in intervention.
Professor Truckenmiller, forgive me for jumping in. It's just that we only have a few minutes left, and I want to get into Michigan specifically and where Michigan's curriculum on reading, where you think it needs to change. And of course, I think also, though, I want to reiterate what you're saying about kindergarten, for example, and how we need to shift the way we view that time period and how much more vital it is. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I think Michigan can learn a lot from Mississippi, which is really nice to have that excellent example and that impetus to say, hey, we can do it in those really great levels. And so one of the things that when I was working with the Regional Education Laboratory Southeast, when I was in Mississippi and Florida prior to coming to Michigan, we trained the state trained every single teacher in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade in how to teach reading. And it was a very long 2-year process where they did that. They had reading coaches. They hired state-level reading coaches that took that training along with the teachers, and then went into the classrooms to help problem solve what the teachers needed to further improve instruction. And so that was my role, was training the coaches on what to look for in the classroom and then how to actually make that happen right there with the kids, depending on what the kids needed in their particular classroom. And so a lot of those things are in place in Michigan, which is really exciting to see. They've had a coaching network now for a little while. They're with the new legislation, there's been some new dyslexia legislation passed. The Michigan Department of Education was tasked with getting experts together and creating lists of what are the materials that have been shown to work and have evidence behind them, so that we can shift the landscape in Michigan. We have a report that shows there's over 444 different curricula used in Michigan, and the top 2 most popularly used curricula in Michigan do not have that evidence behind it. And so we have some excellent opportunity to shift practices and point to things that have been shown to work.
So if you were to say, in the last 30 seconds that we have here, one thing that Michigan needs to change right now, what would it be?
Just one?
Just one. I know. I hate to simplify it for you in that way, Professor Truckenmiller, but I mean, a journey of 1,000 miles, it begins with one step. So one thing.
It sure does. It would be getting everybody together and having everybody aligned and coherent around, we need better instructional practices for kids in reading.
Adrea Truckenmiller is an associate professor of special education at Michigan State University. Professor, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you, Robin.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. Stay with us.